At 38, Christopher carried the weight of a decade in the Marine Corps like a second skeleton beneath his skin, 5 years deployed overseas, 3 with a rifle scope pressed to his cheekbone, and the last 2 piecing together a civilian life most couldn't fathom. He'd grown up in a crumbling neighborhood 2 hours inland, a maze of sagging row houses and potholed streets where survival meant keeping your head down and your fists ready. His childhood was a patchwork of struggle, his mother working double shifts at a textile mill, his father gone before he could walk, and a world that reminded him daily he was less because of his skin. School was no refuge. Teachers skipped over him, kids taunted him with names he'd learned to swallow, and by 15, he'd been stopped by cops 3 times for nothing more than walking home. The Marines had been his way out at 19, a lifeline thrown by a recruiter who saw something in his quiet defiance. Boot camp broke him down and built him back stronger, but it wasn't colorblind whispers followed him, doubts about his grit, until the desert proved them wrong. His 3rd deployment, in a sun-bleached corner of Helmand Province, was where he'd earned his Bronze Star. It wasn't a story he told often, not because it hurt, but because it didn't need telling. His squad had been pinned under fire, a dusty outpost crumbling around them, 2 men bleeding out in the dirt. The LT was down, radio smashed, and the Taliban were closing in, their rounds chewing through mud walls. Christopher didn't wait for orders, none were coming. He'd hauled the wounded to a ditch, laid down cover with his M4, and flanked the enemy alone, moving through the chaos like a ghost. 3 kills, a grenade tossed back before it could detonate, and he'd dragged his squad to safety, 1 man slung over his shoulder, blood soaking his fatigues. The medal came later, pinned to his chest in a quiet ceremony he barely remembered, but the scars stayed both the ones you could see and the ones you couldn't. Port Haven was supposed to be his peace, a coastal retreat he'd chosen 6 months ago after leaving the Corps, drawn by its isolation more than its charm. He'd found the house online, a modest 2-bedroom with a shed, perched on a quiet street near the water, and bought it with savings from years of hazard pay. The Jeep came 2 months back, traded for a beat-up sedan that rattled too much, a reward for a life earned through grit, not gifted by privilege. He liked its understated power, efficient, unapologetic, like him. Finishing his water, he tossed the bottle into the recycling bin by the shed and locked his front door, the faint scent of cedar and fresh varnish lingering inside. The house was still settling into being his name on the deed, his hands on the locks, but it felt like a foothold, a place to stand after years of shifting ground. Backing out, the Jeep's engine growled low, stereo off, just the whisper of tires on gravel filling the cabin. He was headed to the bait shop for fishing line and hooks, a chore he'd put off, nothing urgent, just a thread in the routine that kept him steady. The coastal road unfolded in gentle curves past dune grasses and abandoned piers, the town fading into a quieter stretch where the sea's breath drowned out the hum of daily life. Port Haven wasn't loud or brash, just a grid of tidy streets where crab traps lined yards and neighbors traded curt nods over picket fences, but there was an undercurrent here, a subtle tension he couldn't ignore. Since moving in, he'd felt it, the way eyes lingered too long at the grocery store, the clipped yes sirs from the hardware clerk, the kids who stopped playing to stare as he drove by. The flags weren't just a decoration, they were markers, a quiet claim staked by folks who didn't want him here. He didn't dwell on it. Vigilance was second nature, honed in war zones and sharpened on streets where he'd always been the outsider. But he scanned every corner, every passing vehicle, reading the world like a battlefield. The road was quieter now, the sun sinking lower, casting long shadows over the asphalt. Then he saw it. A battered SUV easing into the lane ahead from a side street, its exhaust coughing loud enough to cut through the stillness. The rear window was a collage of hate stickers and flags screaming venom under the guise of pride. "Take America back," a Confederate banner drooping beside a noose silhouette. "You people don't belong," in faded red letters. Christopher exhaled through his nose, a slow release, not fear, but calculation. The SUV veered left without signaling, drifting over the center line like it owned the road, its fat tires chewing the pavement with aggressive swagger. He slowed, not about to get sideswiped by someone too reckless to steer straight, but at the next stop sign it jerked across both lanes, brakes screeching, cutting him off with no apology, just entitlement wearing steel and rust. In the side mirror, he saw them. Tom Hanlon, mid-40s, white, thick-necked in a faded jacket, his knuckles white on the wheel. Linda, his wife, sharp-faced with a scowl etched deep, perched beside him, and Jake, their wiry son in his early 20s, leaning forward from the back, a sneer twisting his lips. They laughed, a cruel chorus, glancing at Christopher with smug disdain, as if he were a toy to taunt. Tom rolled down his window, leaning out, his fisherman's cap pulled low. "You don't belong here, boy!" he bellowed, voice rough with beer and bravado, the word boy landing like a slap, heavy with history. Linda's sharp tone cut in. "Think you're something." "Huh? Driving that fancy Jeep in our town?" Jake chimed from the back. "Probably stole it, your kind don't earn nothing." Christopher's jaw tightened. The insults a familiar sting, echoes of schoolyard taunts, barracks whispers, but he didn't flinch. "Got something to say? Say it clear," he shot back, voice low and steady, refusing to let their venom slide. Tom stepped out, chest puffed, a beer can dangling from one hand, his boots loud on the asphalt. Linda followed, her sharp eyes glinting with malice, and Jake trailed behind, smirking like he'd been raised on hate. They formed a loose semicircle, a family united in their disdain. "Oh, we'll say it," Tom sneered, stepping closer, his breath sour with hops and resentment. "You're a cockroach in our town, don't belong here, never will." Linda cackled, a high, brittle sound. "Always crying, victim, acting like you're oppressed with that car you don't deserve." Jake grinned. "Bet that uniform's fake thugs don't get medals." Christopher stepped out of the Jeep, boots hitting the pavement with quiet force, his posture steady, unshaken. "Something you need?" he asked, locking eyes with Tom, his tone even but edged with steel, a calm that unsettled them. Tom leaned in, face inches away, his voice dropping to a growl. "You're nothing here, this is our place, and you're filth that crawled in." Linda's laugh was shrill. "No hero, just a dog in a costume." Jake added, "Probably got kicked out uniform's a lie." Christopher didn't reach for the bronze star tucked in his glove box, didn't need to prove what he'd earned. "I built this life while you blamed yours on men like me," he said, closing the gap, his presence a quiet storm. "I fought for this country, bled for it. You don't tell me where I belong." The Hanlons froze for a heartbeat, unaccustomed to defiance, their smugness faltering under the weight of his words. "Pray I stay who I am," he added, each syllable deliberate, "because if I stop holding back, you'll see what I can be." The stop sign cleared, and he climbed back into the Jeep, never breaking eye contact until the door shut with a soft thud. Tom stood there, red-faced, fists clenched, Linda muttering curses under her breath, Jake spitting into the dust. They didn't follow, not yet. Christopher eased the Jeep forward, the encounter lingering like a storm cloud on the horizon, but he pushed it aside, steering toward the bait shop as the sea swallowed the day's last light. He'd faced worse than words, bullets, bombs, the slow grind of war, and this felt like noise, a petty clash with small-minded folks too bitter to matter. He'd survived deserts and ambushes. He could survive the Hanlons, but as he drove, the salt air felt heavier, the quiet too deep, and a flicker of instinct whispered that he'd underestimated their persistence. This wasn't over. It was just the tide turning. The sun had slipped below the horizon by the time Christopher J. Mawhinney turned the Jeep Wrangler back onto his street in Port Haven, its steel-gray frame catching the last glimmers of twilight as they faded into the saltwater haze. The coastal town lay hushed, the rhythmic lap of waves against the docks and the faint clatter of crab traps in the wind, the only sounds breaking the stillness. He'd spent the afternoon at the bait shop picking up fishing line and hooks, then lingered at the pier, watching the tide roll in a ritual that steadied him after the Hanlon family's venom earlier that day. Their words, Tom's boy, Linda's your kind, Jake's thug, echoed in his mind like shrapnel, jagged but familiar. He'd heard worse, faced worse, from childhood streets to desert outposts, but here in a town he'd chosen for peace, it stung deeper. A reminder that racism didn't sleep, not even in the salt-worn quiet of Port Haven. As he pulled into his gravel driveway, the Jeep's tires crunched softly, the engine's low growl tapering off into silence. He sat for a moment, one hand on the wheel, the other brushing the keys, letting the day settle. The air felt off, too, still too heavy like the town was holding its breath. Stepping out, he closed the door with a measured thud and rounded the Jeep toward the mailbox, already sorting through the mental stack bills, maybe a flyer from the hardware store. The street was empty, no dogs barking, no sprinklers, ticking, just the faint hum of a distant boat engine fading into the night. His boots crunched on the gravel as he crossed the lawn, the porch light casting a weak glow over the front steps. But something pulled his gaze sideways toward the shed at the edge of the property. The door was shut, the yard intact, no broken glass or overturned planters, nothing obvious. Then he saw it. Streaks of red and black paint slashed across the shed's wooden siding, bright and dripping, chaotic letters screaming hate into the dusk. He froze, a breath catching, not from shock but from a cold rising clarity. The slurs were unmistakable boy, scrawled 3 times in jagged red, each larger than the last, followed by curses older than the town itself, words that had chased him since he was a kid running home from school with fists clenched. This wasn't random, this was personal, a blade aimed at his chest. He stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the damp grass, and the full weight of it hit him. The ground near the shed was littered with shredded paper, charred scraps of a photo from his mantle. His unit on deployment in Helmand faces he'd carried through hell now burned and tossed like trash. His American flag, the one he'd flown on his first day here, lay stabbed upside down in the dirt, its edges frayed and stained. He pushed the shed door open, the hinges creaking, and inside the wreckage deepened. His military commendations meticulously framed along the wall were smashed glass strewn across the concrete floor. Certificates defaced with more slurs in black marker. One medal bent underfoot, its ribbon torn. The bronze star frame was cracked, the citation crumpled, as if they'd tried to erase what he'd earned what he was. Christopher stood there, jaw tight, shoulders still not shouting, not cursing, just feeling a slow burn rise from his gut, a fire fed by decades of this same hate. This wasn't about property, it was a declaration, a message carved in red and black. You don't belong. He'd heard it in his mother's voice, trembling as she told him about his grandfather's stories, whispers of lynchings in the county, crosses burning on lawns, black families driven out under cover of night. He'd felt it in the barracks when a white sergeant muttered, "Quota higher," behind his back, and in the desert when a wounded private he'd saved still flinched at his touch. Port Haven was no different. The Hanlons' SUV, its flags and noose had been a warning, and this was the follow-through. They thought he'd break, shrink pack up, and leave like others before him. They didn't know him, not the boy who'd fought back in alleys, not the Marine who'd crawled through gunfire, not the man who'd claimed this house as his own. The air had cooled by the time the squad car rolled up its headlights, washing over the driveway, flashing lazily, but silent. No sirens, no rush. Christopher stood near the shed, arms crossed the wreckage untouched, letting it speak for itself. A woman stepped out, Detective April Castillo, Latina mid-30s badge clipped to her belt. Navy slacks creased from a long shift. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene narrowing as they traced the slurs, the shattered frames, the flag in the dirt. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, just walked up with a clipboard under one arm. "You're Mawhinney?" she asked, voice flat but not cold. He nodded once. "Christopher J. Mawhinney." She gestured to the vandalism. "You touch anything?" "No," he said. "Left it as I found it when I got home 20 minutes ago." She pulled out her phone, snapping photos in slow, deliberate arcs, crouching near the charred photo, angling the lens at the bent metal, cataloging each wound to his life. Her silence was professional, not awkward a mind already piecing it together. "Enemies?" she asked, standing, her gaze meeting his. "Had an incident yesterday," he said. "Road rage. White family male, late 40s, about 6 feet. Female passenger, younger male, in the back. SUV lifted Confederate flags, racist stickers. Followed me home." He described Tom's thick neck, Linda's sharp scowl, Jake's wiry frame, the venom in their voices. "Boy. Your kind on thug." Castillo scribbled notes, her jaw tightening slightly. "Names?" "Not yet," he said. "Plate?" "Rusted over, started with GH7, couldn't get the rest." She sighed through her nose. "Cameras?" He pointed to the shed's corner. "Motion sensor, but the lens is smashed." "First thing they hit," she muttered, crouching to photograph the broken camera. "Neighbors?" She angled her head toward the houses across the lane, their windows dark curtains still. "They like their privacy," he said. "No ring cams, no secrets on record." She gave a faint, humorless chuckle. "Figures." A second cruiser arrived, uniformed officers, stepping out with yellow tape, and evidence bags moving with cautious efficiency. Castillo walked the perimeter again, then returned clipboard in hand. "I'll file this as hate-based vandalism," she said. "But with no clear plate, no footage, and unless someone talks, we're thin on leads." Her tone dipped toward empathy. "I'll canvass the block, see if anyone's got a conscience, but people clam up fast on this stuff." He nodded, eyes steady. You ever see this kind stop on its own? She glanced at the slurs, the wreckage. No, they escalate, but they get sloppy. If they come back, we might catch them. I don't bank on luck, he said. She met his gaze, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Not just cop and victim, but two people who'd faced their own versions of this fight. Put some in me then, she said, voice softening. I'll do what I can. Keep your eyes open, Mawhinney. And no retaliation, even if it's deserved. Colby. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. I'm not after revenge, he said. And it was true. Revenge was heat. What he felt was cold. Precise, a calculation born of survival. The officers cleared out after an hour, leaving the yellow tape fluttering in the breeze, the shed a silent monument to hate. Christopher didn't scrub the paint, didn't sweep the glass, not yet. He went inside the house's cedar scent, now tainted by the weight of what lay outside, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and pen. He sketched the SUV from memory, the lift, the dents, the flag's placement, the noose, stickers, faded edges. He circled 3 details, the GH7 plate fragment, a scrape near the wheel well, the Confederate flag's angle, then picked up his phone. Reggie, he said when the line connected. You still know the guy at the body shop near the highway. Reggie Jones, a former Marine who ran a gym in town, grunted on the other end. Yeah, why? Need their security footage from yesterday late afternoon off the feeder road by Eastwood, looking for something specific. Reggie paused then. That truck from your run-in? Yeah, Christopher said, staring at the sketch. Lifted SUV flag's hate stickers. I'll know it when I see it. I'll call Rowan. Reggie said, he owes me. You sure about this? They came to my house, Christopher replied, voice low. I'm sure. He hung up, leaning back, the legal pad stark under the kitchen light. This wasn't about pride. It was about the Hanlons thinking they could mark him, break him, drive him out. They'd misjudged him, just like the bullies in his old neighborhood, just like the sergeant who doubted him, just like the enemy who'd thought a Marine would fold under fire. Racism had followed him from cradle to coast, but here in Port Haven it had crossed a line, his line. He didn't start this, but he'd finish it. Across the street, Mrs. Ellis peered through her blinds, a gray-haired widow who'd lived in Port Haven for 30 years. She'd seen the SUV roll by the night before, heard the engine's growl, watched its taillights fade. She'd done nothing. Fear locked her lips in memories of whispered threats from decades past, keeping her silent. But as she watched Christopher now standing alone in the driveway, her hands trembled, guilt gnawing at her. She didn't speak, didn't call out. Not yet. The dawn broke over Port Haven with a muted gray light, the kind that seeped through the coastal fog and settled heavy on the tidal flats, casting the town's clapboard homes and weathered docks in a somber hush. Christopher J. Mawhinney stood in his driveway, the Jeep Wrangler idling low behind him, its engine a steady growl against the stillness. The shed loomed at the edge of his vision, its red and black slurs crusting under the morning dew. Boy, thug, curses that echoed a lifetime of hate. He hadn't slept much, the night spent replaying the Hanlons' taunts from the road, their SUV's venomous flags, and now this, a violation that turned his peace into a battlefield. Racism wasn't new. He'd carried it from childhood streets where kids spat at him, through Marine barracks where whisperers questioned his worth, to this salty corner he'd claimed as home. But here, in Port Haven, it had teeth, and the Hanlons were its jaws. He slid into the driver's seat, a borrowed silver sedan parked nearby Reggie's cousin's car, beat up and untraceable, his plan already taking shape. They'd come for him. Now he'd go for them. He drove out of town, the sedan's tires humming over cracked pavement, past dune grasses and rusted fishing shacks, the Jeep left behind to avoid recognition. Reggie had called late last night. Roan, at the body shop, had pulled the footage, grainy clips from the feeder road by Eastwood. Christopher met him at the gym, a squat steel building wedged between a tire shop and a boarded-up liquor store, its air thick with sweat and iron. Reggie handed over a flash drive without a word, his broad frame leaning against the desk as Christopher plugged it into a laptop. The screen flickered to life, empty frames, a delivery van, then there, the Hanlon's SUV, lifted high, its rear window a collage of hate Confederate flags, Take America Back, a new sticker faded but unmistakable. Tom stepped out, thick-necked and swaggering, barking at an attendant, Linda's silhouette sharp in the passenger seat, Jake slouched in the back. The plate read GH72VX, clear enough to track, a crack in their armor. That them? Reggie asked, arms crossed. That's them, Christopher said, voice low, eyes fixed on the screen. For days, he shadowed them, the sedan a ghost on Port Haven's back roads. He logged their routines in a notebook, Tuesday grocery runs at the market on 5th, where Tom muttered slurs at a black cashier. Afternoon beer stops at the gas station, Linda sneering at a Latina mom with kids. Nights at a dive bar near the industrial park, Jake spitting "outsiders don't belong" to a crowd that nodded along. The town let it slide, bartenders poured. Clerks rang them up, neighbors turned away complicity woven into Port Haven's fabric. Christopher stayed distant, patient, his Marine training guiding every move. Once, Jake glanced his way near the bar, eyes narrowing, and Christopher eased back into the shadows, heart steady. Another day, a black teen at the gas station, maybe 16, skinny, wary, caught him watching. "You after the Hanlons?" the kid asked, voice low. "Why?" Christopher replied. "They beat my cousin last year, bragged about it. Everyone knows, but no one cares." The words sank in, fuel to the fire. This wasn't their first hunt. By Friday, he knew their rhythm, predictable, arrogant, untouchable until now. He spotted the SUV at the bait shop, parked crooked under a sagging live oak. No cameras, no witnesses. Tom leaned against the tailgate, beer in hand. Linda sat on the bumper, picking her nails. Jake paced with a smirk. Christopher stepped out of the sedan, boots crunching gravel, and crossed the lot, posture calm but unyielding. They turned as one, Tom straightening, Linda's smirk souring, Jake's eyes glinting. "Well, well," Linda called, voice sharp, "if it ain't the neighborhood stray." Tom grinned. "You following us now, boy? House too lonely without your little tantrum?" Christopher stopped 6 feet away, shoulders squared. "You wanted to be seen," he said, voice steady. "So here I am, seeing you." Tom snorted, stepping forward. "You drive around acting like you belong, flags, slogans, threats on that truck, then follow a black man home, paint his house with your filth, smash what he earned. Think no one's going to connect it?" Linda's grin twisted. "Oh, honey, you think we sprayed your shack? Smashed your fake medals?" Jake laughed. "No proof. Thug, you're just crying." Wolf again. Christopher's gaze didn't waver. "You came to my house," he said. "It crossed that line." Tom spat. "I'd cross it again, 'cause it ain't yours. You don't belong here. Not in that Jeep. Not with that flag. Not in that uniform you faked." Linda's voice rose. "You're not one of us, never will be, no matter what costume you wear." Jake sneered. "Go back where you came from. Thugs don't belong in Port Haven." The air shifted, thick with their hate, but Christopher stood still, a rock against their tide. Then Tom lunged, wild and sloppy, fist swinging with years of unchecked rage. "Stay in your place, boy!" he roared. Christopher moved left hand, catching Tom's wrist, yanking him forward, right elbow cracking into his jaw. Tom dropped, beer spilling, knees buckling as he hit the gravel, gasping. Linda screamed, grabbed a skillet from the truck bed, and swung, shrieking, "You don't touch us!" He dodged, the metal grazing his shoulder, and struck her arm, sending the skillet clattering. Jake charged, yelling, "Filthy thug!" A clumsy lunge, Christopher sidestepped, landing a precise strike to his ribs, dropping him beside Tom. Linda scrambled into the SUV, eyes feral, and floored it, tires screaming. Christopher dove aside, but the bumper clipped his thigh, pain searing up his leg as he rolled into the dust. He pushed up, jaw clenched, blood streaking his jeans, watching the SUV fishtail out of the lot. They thought they'd won, thought running meant escape. He limped to the sedan, pain a dull roar, and drove after them, headlights off, tracking the dust trail through back roads past rusted shacks, skeletal trees, the creek's edge. The SUV swerved into a clearing near Flint Creek, Roy's cabin ahead, a squat wooden hideout under thick pines. Christopher parked behind trees, 20 yards out, and crept closer, leg throbbing but steady. Through the window, he saw them. Tom slumped, bleeding, Linda pacing, shouting into a phone, "He attacked us, Roy!" "He's got connections," Jake groaned, clutching his side. Roy, grizzled and tall, paced with a rifle, muttering, "Should have finished him. Those people don't quit." Christopher's breath slowed, his resolve hardening. This was their war, and he was its target. Night draped Flint Creek in a thick, inky silence, broken only by the rustle of pines and the distant lap of water against the muddy bank. Christopher J. Mahaney crouched in the shadows, 20 yards from Roy's cabin, the Hanlons' SUV parked under a tarp, its hate-stained rear window glinting faintly in the lantern light spilling from inside. His thigh pulsed with heat, the gash from Linda's hit-and-run seeping blood through his jeans, but he ignored it, Payne was an old friend, a companion from desert firefights and street brawls. The Hanlons had escalated Om's fists, Linda's truck, their slurs turning Port Haven's quiet racism into a violent crusade. He'd tracked them here, a marine hunting prey, not out of rage, but necessity. They'd marked his house, his life, with their hate. Now, he'd mark them with consequences. Through the window, he saw their panic. Linda pacing, phone to her ear. "Roy, he's coming, we glot'll burn it all!" Tom slumped against the wall, bloodied, groaning. "Filthy dog won't stop." Jake clutched his ribs, muttering, "Should have killed him. Thugs don't deserve this town." Roy, rifle slung over his shoulder, barked, "Truck's ready, go now!" Christopher didn't wait. He rose, crossed the porch in 3 strides, and kicked the door open, hinges splintering with a thunderous crack. The room froze. Linda dropped her bag. Tom lurched upright. Roy swung the rifle too slow. Christopher charged Roy first, a storm breaking through, forearm smashing the barrel aside as it fired, the round tearing into the wall. He drove a knee into Roy's chest, then an elbow to his temple, dropping him, rifle clattering. Tom roared, "You don't belong here, boy," and charged. No weapon, just fury. Christopher pivoted, slamming him shoulder first into the drywall, cracking it. Tom swung wild, a punch Christopher ducked, countering with 2 gut strikes and a palm to the chest, sending him crashing through the dining table, glass shattering, wood groaning. Linda screamed, "You'll never be us!" and swung a kitchen knife low, aiming for his ribs. He sidestepped, caught her wrist, slammed it against the counter. The blade dropped and shoved her into the wall, pinning her. "Enough," he breathed, voice a steel wire. Tom staggered up, grabbing a chair leg, roaring, "Die, thug!" Christopher took the hit on his side, stumbling, then struck Tom's temple with his forearm, sending him through the couch in a heap. Linda squirmed, clawing at him, shrieking, "You're nothing!" He held her firm until sirens wailed, red and blue flashing through the trees. Detective April Castillo burst in, sidearm raised, 2 deputies behind her. "Hands up," she shouted. Christopher stepped back, hands raised, blood smeared across his cheek, posture steady. "They're yours," he said, nodding to the Hanlons. Castillo scanned the wreckage, Roy moaning, Tom crumpled, Linda hissing, then holstered her weapon. Assault, attempted homicide, hate crimes, she listed, deputies cuffing them. Linda spat. "He attacked us, we're the victims." Castillo's voice was ice. "Your prince, your truck, his blood trail, save it, for court." Outside, as the Hanlons were loaded into cruisers, a local reporter's A.M. Carter, young, persistent, snapped photos, scribbling notes. He'd heard the scanner chatter, dug into the Hanlons' past. A black family's car torched 2 years back, a bar fight over outsiders, threats bragged about in town. "This ain't their first," he muttered to Castillo, who nodded grimly. Christopher leaned against the porch railing, legs stiff, watching the taillights fade. "You didn't wait," Castillo said, joining him. "No time," he replied. "They made it clear they wouldn't stop." She glanced at his bloodied knuckles. System couldn't do this alone. He didn't answer, just watched the night settle, the weight of their hate lifting, if only for now. Morning broke over Port Haven with a crisp October wind, the tidal flats shimmering under a sky finally free of fog. Christopher J. Mahaney stood in his driveway, the shed's slurs scrubbed clean, the wreckage cleared, but the scars lingered both on the wood and in his bones. The Hanlons outside his trial had ended yesterday, the courtroom silent as the judge read the sentences. 22 years each for Tom, Linda, and Jake, no parole for 15 assault, attempted homicide, hate crimes stacked like bricks. Their slurs, boy. Thug. "You don't belong," had echoed back at them, witnesses reciting every word, Castillo's file sealing their fate. Port Haven had watched, its silence cracking wide open, the town forced to face the venom it had ignored for years. The news hit fast headlines, blaring racist family jailed after veterans stand, grainy mugshots of the Hanlons scrolling across screens, their smugness stripped bare. Sam Carter's article detailed their history vandalism, beatings, threats against black families, all shrugged off by a town too comfortable with its quiet hate. At the grocery, the cashier who'd once laughed at Tom's Real Americans quip stared at the TV, silent. The bar owner who'd poured their beers muttered, "Shoulda cut Elm off years ago." Across the street, Mrs. Ellis testified at last, shaky, guilt-ridden, admitting she'd seen the SUV that night, her silence broken by Christopher's stand. The neighborhood didn't whisper anymore. It spoke radio calls, comments, a wave of reckoning washing over Port Haven. Donations started days after the arrest. A check slipped into his mailbox, unsigned, Reggie with an envelope he wouldn't take back, the grocery manager with a gift card, mumbling for what they took. A fundraiser bloomed, started by a civics teacher, no speeches, just a note. For the man who stood when we didn't. It aimed for $5,000. It hit $12,000 in a week. Christopher didn't touch it at first, the weight of help after fighting alone, feeling foreign. But the shed's repairs, new siding, wiring. A reinforced door changed his mind. Letting them help wasn't weakness. It was proof the lesson landed. He framed one slur behind glass in the shed's corner, not to honor it, but to remember what he'd overcome. The flag, once stabbed in the dirt, hung again, framed inside with its burns visible, a testament, not a trophy. Neighbors passed differently now. Nods replaced averted eyes. Some waved, a few spoke. The man across the street, silent the night of the vandalism, crossed over one evening as Christopher trimmed the bushes. "You held that line," he said, offering a handshake. "Better than we did." Christopher nodded. Had to. At the gym, Reggie tossed him a towel, grinning. 12 rounds on the bag, go. The ache in his leg lingered, but it was scar tissue now, a reminder of survival. An unmarked envelope arrived later, $10,000, and a note. "You taught us something. Finish it." He donated it to a scholarship for a fallen Marine, quiet as always, because this wasn't about gain, it was about what he couldn't let stand. That night, the sun dipped behind the rooftops, street lights flickering on, the wind carrying cut grass and barbecue smoke. Christopher stood on his porch, leg healed, breath deep, the house whole again. Port Haven hadn't transformed, it still bore its scars. Its flags, but it had shifted, its silence giving way to an earned quiet. He didn't start this fight, but he'd ended it, not with revenge, but with a truth the Hanlons couldn't outrun. Hate had consequences, and he'd made them feel every one. He stepped inside, the door closing softly, peace settling not as a gift, but as a right he'd claimed.